It was the kind of day that felt like the start of a routine, except for the weight on my chest. I had just turned 23, and it felt like my life had already been mapped out for me, a series of steps that I couldn't deviate from. For years, I had lived in the shadow of other people's decisions, always trying to please them, always trying to fit into the role they had cast for me. I had done everything I could to be the person they expected me to be. I had always been the good daughter, the one who helped around the house, the one who stayed out of trouble. But that morning, something felt different. The courtroom was colder than I had imagined, colder than any courtroom in movies. It wasn't the kind of place that made you feel like you were part of something important. It was just a room where life and its harsh truths were handed down. I could feel the eyes of the people in the audience on me. They had all gathered there for one reason: to see how this would end. The truth, the long-buried truth, was about to come out, and I had no idea what it would look like when it did. I had grown up in a small town, surrounded by people who didn't ask too many questions about your past, as long as you fit in with the present. I never questioned my parents, not deeply anyway. When I was younger, I thought it was normal, even if sometimes I felt like I didn't quite belong. But those feelings faded over time, or at least I told myself they did. I had learned to smile through it all, to fit the mold, to go along with the idea that everything was fine. But on that day, sitting in the cold, sterile courtroom, I knew everything was about to unravel. The news had hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't the kind of news you could prepare for. The discovery, the realization that my entire life had been a lie, shook me to the core. They told me I was adopted. They told me that my parents, the people I had called mom and dad for 23 years, were not my biological parents. The words came from my father's lips, a soft confession, something that had been hiding beneath years of carefully maintained silence. They said it like it was something simple, like it was just a fact of life that didn't deserve the weight of emotion or the heaviness of its own truth. But it wasn't simple. It wasn't just another fact to digest. It was a storm, a hurricane that tore through the small world I had built for myself, leaving behind nothing but chaos. For days, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think. How had I not known? How could they have kept it from me all these years? My mind spun in circles, trying to make sense of it, trying to find some explanation for why it had been kept from me. The hardest part wasn't just the news. It was the way they acted, as though it didn't matter. As though I should have been okay with it. As though the fact that I had been raised by strangers, people who weren't even my blood, didn't change everything. They told me it was all for my own good, that they had done what was best for me. But their explanations didn't make sense, not when I looked back at all the moments I had spent questioning my place in the world. I sat there in the courtroom, feeling more isolated than I ever had in my life. The people around me seemed like distant figures, caught up in their own worlds. No one could understand what it felt like to be in my shoes, to suddenly realize that everything you thought you knew about yourself was a lie. There was a man sitting across from me, a stranger, someone who I had never seen before. His presence made my skin crawl, but there was something about him that felt familiar, something that tugged at me. The lawyer, who I barely remembered hiring, had explained the procedure to me the night before. I was to sit quietly, to wait until it was my turn to speak. The court would decide what to do, how to resolve the legal issues surrounding my adoption. But there was something more than just legal issues hanging in the air. There was the question of my identity, of who I really was, and of the family I had spent years loving and protecting. What did it mean to be adopted? What did it mean to have your identity, your very existence, challenged in such a public way? I didn't know the answer. All I knew was that I was sitting in a place that felt so foreign, so different from anything I had ever imagined. I had always thought the truth would set me free, but the truth had shackled me, dragging me into a world I wasn't ready to face. I couldn't help but feel a sense of betrayal, a sense of abandonment. How had they kept this from me? How had they let me live this life, this false life, for so long? But just as I was beginning to crumble under the weight of it all, something unexpected happened. The door to the courtroom opened, and in walked a woman. She wasn't anyone I recognized, but there was something about her that pulled my attention toward her. She was tall, with dark hair that framed her face in loose waves. She looked nervous, unsure of herself, but there was an undeniable strength in her posture, an unspoken confidence that caught me off guard. She glanced around the room, her eyes landing on me, and for the briefest of moments, I felt a jolt of recognition. It wasn't just the way she looked at me, though that certainly had an effect. It was something deeper, something buried inside me, that whispered, "She's the one. She's the reason this is happening." Before I could fully process the thought, she was standing beside the stranger across from me. My heart began to race. The judge had just finished reading out the details of the case, but my mind was no longer on the legal proceedings. It was on this woman. I couldn't understand it. I didn't know who she was or why she was there, but I knew that her presence was going to change everything. The woman looked down at me, her expression a mixture of fear and relief. She opened her mouth, as though to speak, but no words came. I watched, frozen, as her lips trembled, as though she had something she needed to say but couldn't find the strength to say it. The courtroom fell into a tense silence. Every second felt like an eternity, stretching out until finally the woman spoke. It was then that I realized the truth was not just about my parents and their lies. It was about her. The woman standing in front of me, looking as uncertain as I felt, was my real mother. The air in the courtroom felt thick, as though every breath I took was caught in my throat. My heart hammered in my chest, and my palms began to sweat. I couldn't look away from her. This woman, this stranger, who stood there with such a mix of emotions swirling around her. Nervousness, fear, guilt, and something else that I couldn't quite place, was the woman who had given birth to me. She had carried me for 9 months and then, for reasons unknown to me, had disappeared from my life. I didn't know whether to be angry, confused, or relieved. The realization that my real mother was standing before me turned my entire world upside down. I couldn't speak. The words I had rehearsed in my head, questions, accusations, everything I wanted to ask, fled. How could I confront her after all these years? Why now? Why had she waited until everything had fallen apart to show up? My eyes followed her every move, but I couldn't find the courage to stand up and go to her. She looked out of place in the sterile courtroom, her clothes simple, as though she hadn't prepared for anything grand or dramatic. Her hands were clasped in front of her, fingers twisted together as if she were bracing herself for something painful. I could hear murmurs in the courtroom, whispers that bounced off the cold walls, but I couldn't focus on them. The only sound I could hear was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. The judge, sensing the shift in the room, cleared his throat. He motioned for the woman to sit beside the stranger who had been sitting across from me. My supposed father, the man who had raised me for 23 years. The stranger's presence was oddly comforting, but also disturbing. This man, Cullen, as I now knew him to be, had played the role of father in my life, but now, everything about him seemed hollow. He wasn't the person I had thought him to be. I had lived with him for so long, helped him with bills, cared for him in his moments of need, but now it felt like I was seeing him for the first time. His face, normally hardened by years of work and sacrifice, now looked fragile, as if the weight of everything was finally catching up with him. The woman sat down beside him, her hands still trembling. She didn't look at me, but I could feel her gaze in the corner of my vision. There was so much I wanted to say, to scream at her. Why had she left me? Why had she never tried to find me? But then another part of me, the part that had been raised with the values of family and forgiveness, wondered if I could ever really understand her reasons. Maybe there was more to this story than I could see in that moment. The judge, sensing the tension, began to speak. His voice was calm, steady, as though he were trying to restore order to a situation that had already spiraled out of control. We are gathered here today to resolve the legal issues surrounding the plaintiff's adoption and to discuss the paternity and legal guardianship of the individual sitting here. He motioned to me. It seems we have an unusual case here. We have a biological mother, Ms. Jacobs, who has recently come forward, and a father who, for all intents and purposes, has raised the child in question. What we need to establish now is the way forward. I barely heard him. My mind was still racing. This woman, my real mother, was sitting right there beside Cullen, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. It wasn't just the legal documents, the papers I had signed years ago that made this real. It was the raw, painful truth that I had been living a lie for my entire life. I wanted answers. I needed them. But I had no idea where to start. I couldn't just sit here and pretend everything was okay, couldn't simply allow the silence to stretch between us while the judge droned on. The weight of the moment hit me all at once. This was real. This was happening. My family, the family I had known, was not my real family. Without thinking, I stood up. The movement startled everyone in the room. My legs felt weak beneath me, but I stood taller than I had ever felt before. My voice cracked as I spoke, louder than I had intended, but the words needed to come out. "Why now?" I asked, my eyes locked on my real mother. "Why wait until now? Why did you leave me?" She flinched, the way her shoulders tensed betraying the fact that my words had struck a chord. She didn't respond immediately, and I could feel the room fall into an uneasy silence. The judge looked at me, his face sympathetic but firm, as if he was trying to bring the situation back under control. But I couldn't let it go. I couldn't hold back the flood of emotions that had been building inside me for years. "Why did you let them lie to me? Why didn't you come for me?" The questions tumbled out, faster than I could process them. "I've spent my whole life thinking they were my parents, that they loved me, but you're telling me they aren't. You left me. You let them raise me like I was theirs, and now I'm supposed to just accept that." I turned to Cullen, my anger shifting to him, though it wasn't his fault. "You knew, didn't you? You knew all along, and you never told me. You kept me in the dark. Why?" Cullen's face was impassive, his eyes never quite meeting mine. But I could see it in the way his jaw clenched, the way his hands tightened into fists, that he had been keeping secrets. The truth was written all over his face. He had known. He had known everything. The woman beside him finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't leave you," she said, her voice shaking. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought you'd be better off. But when I saw what they were doing, when I saw how they loved you, I couldn't come back. I couldn't tear you away from them." She paused, then added in a voice filled with pain, "I didn't know how to face you. I didn't know what to say." Her words didn't make sense. She had thought I would be better off? But that didn't explain why she hadn't even tried to reach out, why she had never once come to see me. How could she have made that choice for me, without even asking? I turned away from her, my chest tight with frustration, and looked at the floor. The courtroom had fallen silent once again, but I couldn't focus on the surroundings anymore. I was caught in my own head, trapped between the past and the present, between two people who had shaped my life in different ways, yet both had left me with nothing but questions. There was no easy way out of this. There was no simple explanation. All I could do was wait for the truth to come, piece by painful piece, and hope that, somehow, I could make sense of it all before it consumed me completely. The story was just beginning, and I had no idea what twists would come next. The courtroom was still. The tension hung heavy in the air, thick and suffocating. I felt the weight of everyone's eyes on me, like they were all waiting for something. Maybe they were waiting for me to crumble, for me to break under the enormity of the truth that had been dropped on me. Maybe they wanted a show, some drama that would make them feel better about their own lives. But I wasn't about to give them that. Not today. I tried to steady my breathing, but my chest was tight, like there was no air in the room. The world felt distant, as if I was watching everything unfold from behind a glass wall. The woman sitting beside Cullen, my real mother, was still staring at me, her face a mixture of guilt and sorrow, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough for all the years that had been stolen from me, all the moments I should have had with her. And then there was Cullen. He had been my father in every way that mattered, and yet now, as I looked at him, it was hard to reconcile the image of the man who had raised me with the reality of his role in this twisted story. Had he known all along? Had he been complicit in this? Or had he truly believed that he was my father, just another man who had been lied to? I didn't know. I wasn't sure I ever would. The judge cleared his throat, snapping me out of my thoughts. The moment was slipping away, and the room was beginning to feel like a cage, its walls closing in on me. The judge spoke calmly, trying to regain control, but his words were like static, barely audible over the storm inside my head. "We need to proceed," he said. "This case involves not just legal matters, but emotional ones as well. The facts must be clarified for the court." I couldn't take it anymore. The uncertainty. The questions that had no answers. I had lived my entire life in the dark, and now that the truth was finally here, I didn't know if I could handle it. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor as I pushed it back. The room seemed to freeze for a moment, every single person waiting for me to speak, to make a move. But what could I say? How could I put into words the anger that had been simmering inside me for years, the feelings of abandonment, of betrayal? How could I explain the heartache that came with knowing that the life I had lived was a lie? The answers I wanted were still locked away, and no matter how hard I tried, they weren't going to come easy. The woman beside Cullen, my real mother, shifted in her seat, her hands trembling. She seemed like she wanted to speak, but the words didn't come. Instead, she just watched me, her eyes filled with a sadness that felt too heavy for me to bear. I wanted to scream at her, to ask why she hadn't fought for me, why she hadn't come back when I needed her the most. But I didn't. I just stood there, my hands clenched at my sides, trying to keep my emotions in check. "You need to sit down," the judge said, his voice firm but not unkind. I could feel his eyes on me, his quiet attempt to restore order to the chaos I had created. I nodded, slowly sinking back into my seat. I felt like I was drowning in my own thoughts, the pressure of the courtroom, the weight of the truth, all closing in on me. I didn't know how much longer I could keep it together. Cullen's voice broke the silence, low and hesitant. "You have to understand," he said, looking at me with eyes that had once been full of warmth but now felt empty. "We never meant for this to happen. We didn't know how to tell you. It wasn't easy, keeping it from you all these years, but we thought it was best. We thought you were better off." I stared at him, the words cutting deeper than I wanted to admit. "Better off," I repeated, the anger flaring again. "You thought I was better off not knowing the truth? You thought it was better for me to grow up in the dark, believing that you were my real parents? That the life I was living was a lie?" Cullen shifted uncomfortably in his seat, looking down at the table as though the weight of his own actions was too much to bear. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to make up for the years I had spent living in that house, feeling like an outsider in my own skin. It wasn't enough to erase the nights I spent wondering why I never quite fit in, why I felt so different from everyone around me. The cracks were already showing, and there was no way to fix them. The woman, my real mother, finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, barely a whisper, but it cut through the tension like a knife. "I'm sorry," she said, her words trembling. "I didn't know how to come back. I thought you were better off with them. I thought they could give you what I couldn't. But I was wrong. I should have never left you. I should have fought for you. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to scream at her for abandoning me, for letting me grow up without her, for choosing to stay away when I needed her most. But instead, I just felt numb. I couldn't process it. I couldn't find the strength to feel anything other than the crushing weight of everything that had been stolen from me. I stood up again, this time without thinking. The action was instinctive, as though I had to physically distance myself from everything in the room. I walked toward the back of the courtroom, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. I needed space. I needed to think, to make sense of the choices they had made for me, the lies they had told, to understand why they had kept me in the dark for so long. The door of the courtroom opened, and I stepped outside, the cool air hitting me like a shock to my system. The quiet hum of the town outside felt like a strange contrast to the chaos inside the courtroom. I had never felt more alone in my life, yet strangely, I also felt freer than I ever had before. The truth had come crashing into my world, and though it had shattered everything I knew, it had also given me a chance to rebuild. But I wasn't ready to face them. Not yet. Not until I understood everything. Until I could figure out how to move forward. I walked down the steps of the courthouse, my heart still racing, my thoughts a blur. I needed time to process the weight of what had happened. I needed to think about what came next, about how to navigate this new reality. And then, just as I turned the corner, my phone buzzed. I pulled it out of my pocket, and my heart skipped a beat as I saw the name on the screen. It was a message from my real mother. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I stood still for a moment, the words on the phone screen blurring as my heart beat wildly in my chest. I didn't know what to expect from the message. Was it another apology? Another attempt to explain herself in a way that wouldn't make sense? Or perhaps just another plea for my forgiveness? Part of me wanted to throw the phone across the street, to reject the idea of ever hearing from her again. But another part of me, the part that still desperately craved some kind of connection, was afraid to ignore it. Afraid that if I walked away now, I would never know the full truth. I unlocked my phone, the screen lighting up as the message appeared. I know this is sudden, but there's something you need to know. Meet me tomorrow, at the cafe on 5th. It's important. My mind raced, questions bombarding me from every angle. What could possibly be so important that she would text me after all this time? After everything that had happened today, how could there be anything else to say? But my curiosity, my need to understand, outweighed the hurt. I couldn't let this go. I needed closure. Or maybe I was just too scared to face what had happened without it. The next morning, I found myself standing outside the cafe, my hands shoved deep into my coat pockets as I stared at the door. The morning air was cold, and I could see my breath coming out in little puffs as I exhaled. A small part of me wondered if this was all a mistake. Maybe I shouldn't be here. Maybe I was better off not knowing anymore. But another part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, something crucial that I needed to understand. And maybe, just maybe, this woman, this stranger who was supposed to be my mother, had the answers. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The cafe was warm and smelled like fresh coffee, the kind of comforting smell that almost felt like home. I looked around, scanning the room, until I saw her. She was sitting at a small table by the window, looking just as nervous as she had the day before in the courtroom. Her eyes flicked to mine as I walked toward her, but she didn't move, didn't stand up. She just sat there, waiting, as if she had been expecting me. I sat down across from her, and for a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence between us felt unbearable, thick with everything that had been left unsaid. Finally, she broke it, her voice shaky but steady. I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to bring you into my mess. But now I have no choice. I stared at her, the words heavy in the air. What are you talking about? I asked, my voice betraying the fear I had been holding back. Why did you leave me? Why didn't you ever try to find me? She looked down, her hands trembling as she folded them on the table. Because I couldn't. I didn't have a choice. I thought I was doing the right thing, letting you go, letting them raise you. But it was a mistake. A huge mistake. Then why didn't you come back? I asked again, my voice breaking this time. The anger I had tried to suppress all this time rose up again. Why didn't you come for me? Why did you let them keep me in the dark? Her eyes welled up with tears, and for the first time since I had met her, she looked truly vulnerable, like a woman who had carried a weight for far too long and was finally ready to face it. Because of him, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the cafe. Because of your father. He wasn't just your father. He was my husband, and I couldn't tell you the truth, not when it would destroy everything. I felt a chill run down my spine as her words sank in. What do you mean, destroy everything? I asked, my heart racing. Who is he?
Who are you talking about?
She looked at me, her eyes filled with a kind of sorrow I had never seen before. He's not who you think he is. None of it was real. He's not your father. I froze, the words ringing in my ears. What are you saying? You mean Cullen isn't my father? I felt the ground beneath me shift, my entire world starting to tilt. No, he's not, she replied, her voice soft, almost pained. And I didn't want you to know. But now, I have to tell you. I stared at her, disbelief clouding my thoughts. How could you not tell me this? How could you let me grow up with him, thinking he was my father, when you knew the truth all along? She winced, her face crumpling with regret. I was scared. I didn't want you to hate me. I didn't want to lose you. But more than anything, I was scared of what he might do if you found out. I thought it was safer for you not to know. Safer? I could barely speak the word, the bitterness bubbling up inside me. You thought it was safer for me to grow up in a lie? To live my entire life not knowing who I really am? She nodded, her eyes filled with tears now. I know I was wrong. I know I shouldn't have kept it from you. But it wasn't just about keeping you safe from the truth. It was about keeping you safe from him. I leaned back in my chair, my mind whirling. Who is he then? Why did you leave me with him if you knew the truth? She hesitated, then finally spoke the words that would change everything. He's not just your father. He's your abuser. The room seemed to spin as her words crashed over me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Every word she had spoken before, every memory I had of Cullen, every moment I had spent thinking of him as my father, suddenly shattered. The man who had raised me, the man who I had cared for, who I had trusted, was the man who had kept me in the dark, who had lied to me, who had manipulated me my entire life. I don't understand, I whispered, my voice trembling. Why didn't you tell me? She wiped her eyes, her hands shaking. I couldn't. He was dangerous, and he still is. I thought if I just stayed away, if I kept my distance, you'd be safe. But I was wrong. I should have come back for you. I should have fought for you. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to tell her how much she had hurt me, how much this betrayal had broken me. But instead, all I could do was sit there, staring at the woman who had given birth to me, the woman who had let me grow up with a monster, and wonder how it had all gone so terribly wrong. You need to leave, I finally said, my voice hollow. I can't talk to you right now. I need to think. She nodded, her eyes filled with unspeakable sorrow, and stood up. She hesitated before turning to leave, and then, without another word, she was gone. I sat there for what felt like hours, my mind racing, my heart heavy with the weight of everything I had just learned. Everything I had ever known was a lie, and now I had to figure out how to put the pieces together again. The door of the cafe closed softly behind her, and the world outside seemed to carry on as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything had changed, and I wasn't sure how to move forward.